Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's special live broadcast with my very special guest, Tom Horn. I'm Steve Quayle. For the record, it's the 25th of June, 2010, and tonight we're going to be talking about transhumanism, also singularity, and genetic Armageddon. Now, Tom Horn has written so many books, and he and I have done a series of interviews over the years that have gone viral worldwide. And tonight we're going to bring it up to speed and tell you how close all of these events, prophetic and technological, are close to coming to fruition and are being put into place. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Steve. Great to be back on the air with you again. We don't do it often enough.
Well, I can tell you this, that I think tonight is a watershed event, because tonight I want to pull out all stops, Tom. And the thing is, as you know, the majority of the people that listen to us have heard you and I, both independently and together, have been on your website, my website. But tonight let's talk about transhumanism first, and the second hour we'll go into wherever we're led. But let's, first of all, define transhumanism for people, because I find that, you know, too many times I know what I mean, but I'm personally not making it clear. So let's go with kind of in an orderly talking point fashion.
Oh, yeah. Well, sure. Transhumanism, just that international, intellectual, fast-growing cultural movement that's also now supported, of course, by people within the military, as we'll talk about later, and that intend to use what's called GRIN technologies, genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology, as tools to radically redesign mankind. Essentially, it's a movement that believes that we no longer have to wait on the daunting task of natural evolution to respond to its environment, that now we can take our own destiny, our fate, into our own hands, and we can, through technology, begin altering what it means to be a human and accelerate the pace of our next phase.
Well, I think, too, yep, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was just going to say, Tom, from the beginning, the devil, the enemy of men's souls, has tried to wipe out the human race. And it's so telling and compelling that a lot of people that think prophecy was fulfilled 2,000 years ago have not been able to factor in or figure out that the technological advancements, coupled with what we would call fallen angel technology and knowledge, is now to the point where literally what the transhumanists are saying is God, and even if they acknowledge God, most don't, but some do, if God were real, then he made a mistake in making human, and now we're going to do it better than God. We're going to recreate this Homo noeticus, the new man, and bring it to fruition. We're not going to mess around with all the design flaws of free will. We're just going to program these automatons. Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. There is a prophetic angle to this. There is a wicked, antichrist, end times spirit that is the fulfillment of prophecy. It's pressing to come into the world now. Only he that now restraineth will restrain till he be taken out of the way. This is a presence that is waiting, really, for mankind to give over some level of permission or invitation, which I think is happening right now in two different ways. One is the forbidden technological side of it. Those who no longer fear God, they're now playing God and seeking entry, I think, for the spirit through science, whether they understand it as that or not. And then, unfortunately, Steve, the other side of it is those who are allowing this to happen simply by not opposing it or dialoguing about it, i.e. mostly the organized church, where the issues, the ethics, the bioethics, it's left to a handful of people like me and you right now that are out there, the watchmen on the wall. I guess it's always been that way, though, huh? When you have a prophetic spirit, you know, you stand up and you declare what's happening. And I can tell you that ever since the book Apollyon Rising came out, two different things that the whole world, as far as I know, that contacts me wants to talk about. One, in the earliest days when that book came out, was the year 2012 and the extra Mesoamerican cultures that fixated on it. You and I already did shows on that. In fact, you were the first one to do shows with me on that. And the second subject is this transhumanism, and how it appears, at least in my belief system, to be the billion-pound elephant that's standing in the middle of prophecy circles right now, that the lion's share of critical Christian thinkers don't seem to be recognizing, or very few of them are waking up to it. For instance, this year's H+ Summit, Humanity Plus, is another name for transhumanism, in case anybody in the audience doesn't know that, was hosted just by Harvard University Science Center in Cambridge, Massachusetts, ended just last week, June 13th, or a week and a half ago. This was a two-day event that explored how humanity is going to be radically changed by technology in the near future. And so you had speakers like Mr. Singularity himself, Ray Kurzweil, talking about how technology is going to be used soon to modify our bodies, our minds, our lives, our world. He was joined by scientists, philosophers, legal scholars, bioethicists, all who merged on campus to start educating the world, if you will, about how in recent years, astonishing technological development is now pushing the frontier of humanity towards these far-reaching morphological transformations that are in the very near future going to redefine what it means to be a human. Now, I said a moment ago that the transhumanists are supported now by an equally impressive list of U.S. military advisors, bioethicists and law professors and academics who also now see the use of genetics, robotics, grand technologies as tools that are going to radically redesign what it means to be human, minds, physiology, offspring, and Steve, even perhaps as Joel Guru in his best-selling book Radical Evolution is now claiming, our very souls. And it's interesting now as you're following what's happening within transhumanist camps that it's taking on a very, very spiritual theme to it, even to the point that now many of them are talking about how they want to make contact with the other world. And maybe we can talk about that dimension of it later, but unfortunately for these utopians and for mankind, the cultural shift that's now underway also, according to some transhumanist writers, actually forecasts a future that's not only going to be dominated by a new species of unrecognizably superior humans, but an unfathomable war. And they're defining it as both physical and spiritual. And in fact, when you read their writings, it sounds very much like these agnostic transhumans are describing the end of the Bible. They're describing Armageddon. And this is something that I don't think, first of all, the majority of the world isn't even aware of how this is a new arms race now, but secondly, they're totally not prepared for what it implies and for what is coming. Let me make a statement about this war. This isn't just going to be fought on land, air, and sea, but it's going to be fought in dimensions that are not even yet comprehensible. Even now, there are synthetic forces that are going to plot, or already are, the wholesale annihilation of mankind. These are under design right now in leading laboratories, public and private, funded by the most advanced nations on earth, including the official governments of the United States, France, Britain, Austria, China, to name a few, who is a result of nanotechnology, neurotechnology, germline engineering, molecular scale engineering, and those various related fields of science, any time now, believe, singularity is going to occur, and strong artificial intelligence, or what Hugo de Garis calls artilects, which is a word of his own making, it means artificial intellect, artilects, are going to emerge, and overnight we are going to have godlike, massively intelligent machines that are trillions of times faster and smarter than humans, and whose rise, according to Hugo de Garis, is going to prove profoundly disrupted to human culture, not just in the sense it's going to lead to a division between the philosophical and ideological and maybe even religious and political groups who either support this new form of life or oppose it, but he believes that it is going to emerge possibly as such a human threat that it is going to lead to the death of literally billions of Americans, of humans, before the end of the 21st century. And for people who...
That's true. And Tom, let me just interject this really quick, because Jesus said if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, there would be no flesh left alive. And I've been seeing a lot of interesting prophecies where the Lord himself is calling the return of the soulless ones, in other words, the ones without soul. And later in the show, we'll talk about, too, the reconstituting genetically of some of the most evil caricatures and characters in history. And I've tried to get across to people, look, when demons, and we'll talk about that, too, when demons are cast out of people, in essence, they look for a body. Jesus even taught about it. Look for a body to re-inhabit and reanimate. So I think it's fascinating that the hyperdimensional physics realm, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, what you know as reality and what the science, the black science, the hidden science knows of reality are two different things. And Tom, you know, it's so hard sometimes to get it across to specifically God's people that, look, there's a whole realm out there that they've got to learn to identify, deal with, and battle with in the power of the Holy Ghost and with the Holy Spirit. And if they don't, they're going to be overwhelmed by it. And see, that's what your and my, I would say, our mutual concern has been, is to get the people that have been trusted with the keys of the kingdom not to surrender to the people that are opening up with the devil's keys, the gates of hell. Because unless people get the supernatural and begin to war against the supernatural and naturally, and we can talk about that later, the thing is that what would you say, the command of the living God to literally, rise up and fight against principalities and powers, I think people are being steamrolled right now, and the pulpits have become, in my opinion, putrefying places of self-indulgence and self-worship, and they have absolutely abdicated their role to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world.
Yeah, you know, and what's very frightening about that, Steve, is that some of the people that I've been doing, like with Gary Sturman, for instance, of Prophecy in the News, and some of these people that I consider to be very solid biblical scholars, they're saying the same things. They may not be saying it on camera, but they're sure saying it off camera, that they're very, very concerned that the institution of the church, not the true body of Christ, but the institution of the church, what we think of as the church, has completely lost its way. And then many of them actually believe that it is forming into the largest cult in the history of mankind. But be that what it is, what is astonishing to me is that it is also now transhumanists and some of the people within their own camp that are taking a dystopian view of the future. These are people, that started out talking about how they're going to become their own Ubermans, they're going to become Superman, they're going to become whatever, and some of them now are looking at their own technology as it is advancing, and they're being honest with where some of this technology could go. And the amazing thing is they may not refer to it as Armageddon or the rise of the Nephilim or whatever, but they're saying exactly the same thing. And that's the startling thing, is that you have a few prophetic voices like yours that are out there that are engaging these issues, and now you've got a rising segment within both the military and the transhumanist camps that are saying the same thing in different language. Somewhere the church is lost in the middle, and my only hope is that by doing these kind of shows, we reach as many as can be reached, wake up as many as can be woke up, because the day is coming when people had sure better know who they are in Christ, or they will not be able to stand against the forces that are coming. And Steve, not to you get the old preacher started in me, I was thinking the other day, when we're talking about the days of Noah, we always, and we should, discuss what happened during the days of Noah, the rise of the Nephilim, the Watchers. But there was another sign of the days of Noah that could be a fulfillment of Matthew 24:2, and that is that God's covenant people, those who were imbued with his power, this was also a sign of the days of Noah, that they stood up to the Nephilim and they won. They overcame them with supernatural power. David slew Goliath. David, too, had mighty men. And God's covenant people, filled with his Holy Spirit, were the only power on earth that could stand and be victorious. And isn't it amazing that this is exactly how the church is described? The true body of Christ is, in this generation as in other generations, the only power on earth against which the gates of hell cannot prevail. So it's my hope that enough people will listen to what we're talking about. They'll learn at least the basic information about what is emerging in forbidden science and technology, and also the prophetic aspects of it, and that they'll learn how to stand and, full of the Holy Spirit, take their position in God, because they may have to do that in ways that haven't been seen since David slew Goliath. But back to, let me just tell you one other thing about Hugo de Garis, and then we can move on. I don't know if you've read his book, The Art-elect War.
I have not.
Well, Hugo de Garis, he's the director of the Artificial Brain Lab at Xi'an University in China. He's quoted by Ray Kurzweil and all these other people that are working towards singularity. But Hugo specifically is actually an artificial brain builder. He's worked for government laboratories, private laboratories. He's quite famous in this field. But he wrote a book called The Art-elect War, Cosmos versus Terrans, a bitter controversy concerning whether humanity should build godlike, massively intelligent machines. That's the title of his book. It's a long title. He wrote the book because he believes that unfolding due to exponential growth and development this century in grand technologies, that at any moment now, the Wright lab, his lab, another one, they're going to make the break to singularity, and artificial intelligence is going to come online, and he believes it's going to not only lead to machines of godlike intelligence, but it's going to split humanity into two political groups, which is real interesting, because when you read it, it sounds like the forces that are against humans and those who are for preserving humanity. It sounds just like the demonic warfare that'll happen as prophesied in the Bible. De Garis, he describes the two groups on Earth as the Cosmos and the Terrans. The human group that's in favor of the plan of the Art-elects, and we don't have time to go into all this detail, but the plan of the Art-elects to create superhumans and also to move out into the cosmos, he calls them Cosmos. And to them, the plan of the Art-elects really becomes their own religion. They see it as a deity. They see it as an artificial god. But the second human group that's opposed to the plan of the Art-elects, he calls those the Terrans, Terra, of the earth, terrestrial. And these are those who are going to argue that allowing the cosmos to build Art-elects will also imply accepting the risk that one day the Art-elects might decide that the human species is a pest, and since the Art-elects are so vastly superior to human beings in intelligence, it would be very easy for them to exterminate the human species. Therefore, to the Terrans, the Cosmos are worse than the regimes of Hitler or Stalin or Mayo or any other regime that murdered tens of millions of people in the 20th century, because this time we're talking about the potential annihilation of the entire human species, billions of people. Well, he believes that singularity is overnight going to set in motion what within just a few years is actually going to result in World War III, except this time it's a fight for the preservation of humanity. And interestingly, he also, now he goes on in his book, I'll say this and then get past him, but he goes on in his book to talk about how the building the Art-elects is proceeding nonetheless, and he talks about this quiet, dark something that is in him that's pushing him to make these breakthroughs and to lead to the creation of Art-elects. And as a result, he talks about how he goes, and he's not a Christian, by the way, he goes to bed at night thinking about his godlike synthetic intelligence and the breakthrough that's right at hand, and he said he becomes enraptured of it. It's like a religious experience for him. But then he says he'll fall asleep and he'll wake up in a cold sweat, jolted from bed in a horrific dream in which he's seeing vivid scenes of his descendants and all of humanity slaughtered at the hands of the artificial deities. Now, what's interesting is that he has put pen to paper, and he has, as a transhumanist, he calls himself a cosmist, but there really is no functional difference between a cosmist and a transhuman, is that what he has described on paper, other research scientists are also saying the same thing, and they too kind of describe how that something is pushing them, motivating them to feverishly work toward what soon could become this nightmarish predicament that mankind is not going to survive. Well, Steve, I think you and I would know what's behind that, what's pushing them that they can't quite put their finger on to bring about.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's important for people to understand too that obviously, if you read the Book of Enoch and some of the other extra biblical texts that you and I have tried to share with people that are a phenomenal source of data and background, the thing that most people lose track of is that the binding of a supernatural intelligence in the different angels that have been locked up, fallen angels, and the demons, the disembodied spirits. We're talking about the outpicturing of their former characters being, if you will, superimposed on the human. That's what obviously Daguerre's is dealing with right now. He's dealing with the eternal struggle of good and evil within himself, and it's almost like the hand of God is showing him where he's going to lead. But, you know, it's interesting because one of the neatest things about comparing Christianity to the way the devil works, the good shepherd still leads the sheep, but the butcher always drives the game to slaughter. And I think that, you know, the illustration you're giving, Tom, is the absolute most simplistic picture of the difference between the love of God and the hatred of the devil for humanity. And look, this is the same thing that was in the Terminator movies. James Cameron understands it perfectly. James Cameron, obviously the producer of Avatar, director of Avatar, the point that is being made is Skynet becomes the very thing that you're talking about right now. And that's, well, see, it's like the world of the intelligence, when I use that, or lack of intelligence agencies, have fed to Hollywood all of their plans. And now when we see, and we'll get to it later, splice and that whole technology, the point is that we have right now everything that God has bound and David and his mighty men fought and Joshua and Caleb fought and the giants dispersed throughout the earth. And when they died, those spirits became demons upon the earth. The book of Enoch says that. The book of Giants says that. The point is that now we're dealing with, if you will, a complex singularity in a what I would call a composite hybrid, and that is absolutely going to make war against the people of God and the inhabitants of Earth to such a degree. And DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, man, their super soldier program that's been in effect for so long. If we get a chance, I'll tell you about the island of Dr. Moreau and someone I know personally who was in that sort of lab, and this is almost 40 years ago. So the point is that this is ready to spring, to launch, to be thrust into us almost, as you say, overnight, and I believe it's going to literally come that fast. And if people don't understand singularity, if they don't understand transhumanism, we can basically bottom line it and work backwards. It's the destruction of humanity and the introduction of its and things that will make war against God, believing they can prevail, but they won't.
That's right. Well, singularity is going to solve any remaining problems that yet stand in the way. And I think, frankly, God has simply given us a grace period over a period of time. He has kept the minds of men like Hugo de Garis and Kurzweil and others that are experts in artificial intelligence. He has kept their minds from being able to put their fingers on what some of the final resolution will be to give the church time to respond to this. The church hasn't responded. There was articles out today, again, talking about how most teenagers today, because they've watched their parents over the last 20 years, they don't even know what the gospel is anymore. They're deists, and they just think that there's some abstract God out there somewhere who's really, one of the descriptions was he's kind of a chauffeur, if you will. He just kind of comes around once in a while with a little, napkin draped over his arm and serves them and helps them be happy and all that. But they're clueless about true doctrine. But singularity at any moment is going to, I think, be perfected. We're going to hit that moment in time where what Gary Sturman describes as the diminishing presence of the Holy Spirit on earth right now hits a moment in time where it's going to allow for this presence to push through, and in the blink of an enhanced eye, most of humanity is going to be reduced to the status of a domestic animal in the minds of this artificial intelligence. People, for those that don't understand what singularity means, it's just simply that future moment that many futurists and tech experts believe is imminent, that gives birth overnight to some version of the Artilex, the artificial intelligence, who suddenly come online as conscious, living, synthetic superminds that are immensely more powerful than humans. You might be familiar, in fact, I'm sure you are, Steve, how in the 90s there was critical thinking about the timing of the singularity from a military aspect and the emergence of strong artificial intelligence, and it led San Diego State University professor, computer scientist Werner Venge, in his often quoted and now famous lecture, The Coming Technological Singularity, which he delivered at Vision 21 Symposium, which had been sponsored by NASA Lewis Research Center, Ohio Aerospace Institute, all these places. Well, he went there, and he said that soon we will have the technological means of creating superintelligence. And what was interesting is, here again, listen to a man who's a scientist, a secularist. As far as I know, he has no religious persuasion, but he sounds so apocalyptic. He says we will soon give birth to superhuman intelligence. In the very next sentence he says, shortly thereafter, the human era will be ended. So it's just so apocalyptic. Now, and I kind of think that this might be the way singularity actually occurs, because we're learning more and more about the neural processes, how to decode the brain's secret language and put it into computer code and then reinterpret it, and we've made gigantic headway on that. But there's something a little different about human nature and conscience, and philosophers, you know, they've been going on and on and on about, okay, maybe we can get artificial intelligence, but how does it become truly conscious, as in almost as if it has a synthetic soul? Well, when you look at the cyborgists, now I'm talking about people like Kevin Warwick, the professor, you know, of cybernetics at Reading University in England, Mr. Cyborg himself.
Yes.
He endorsed Hugo de Garis's work, but he doesn't believe the human era will end so much as it will be assimilated.
Right.
That's fine. I was just going to make the additional point when we're talking about singularity. You know, some people like Kurzweil and like that see singularity as occurring perhaps as kind of a freestanding artificial intelligence, a machine, if you will. But then there's another camp, they just simply call themselves cyborgists. Kevin Warwick, who I mentioned before we went to the commercial break, is certainly one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known. He's a professor of cybernetics in England. But he believes that the human era isn't so much going to end as a result of singularity as be assimilated like the Borg in Star Trek with machine intelligence. Yeah, where technological, and I think purely from the scientific point of view, because of this debate about how will machine intelligence achieve consciousness, I believe that when you're looking at cyborgization, where it is the merging of the computer capacity, the teraflops, the amazing speed of computer technology, but where it's actually joined to a human brain, not a freestanding machine, but inside human cyborgs, where you have human-machine integration is realized, enhanced biology, recombined to include living brains that are cybernetic, machine-readable, interfaced with artificial neural networks, where transhumans with amplified intelligence become so completely superior to their biological counterparts, normal humans, as to become literally incomprehensible. Ultimately, the post-human incarnation of the Artilex that Hugo de Garis and others like him are working so hard to create. So, to cyborgists and transhumans in general, actually, what's called brain-machine interfacing, BMI technology, is one of several of these sciences, dozens actually of these sciences that are under employment now towards a post-human future. But the truth is, nothing less than the wholesale redesign of human biology itself is actually the big picture. That's why I think the cyborgists are more in line, because it's everything from remanufacturing our mental acuity and adapting it to be machine readable, changing our physical dexterity to be able to host it, genetic integration even with other life forms, which therefore also then not just provides conscious to these living godlike machines, but perhaps even other modes of perception that the human mind does not have that we can talk about later, where we're integrated with plants and animals, synthetic creations. In other words, Watchers technology, exactly what they did in order to produce what these transhumanists so warmly refer to as humans 2.0. And as you know, Steve, I've actually personally debated leading transhumanist Dr. James Hughes. He was he was the head of the World Transhumanist Association until it was changed into the IEET, which he's now CEO of, the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. I've also had him on my show recently where we're talking about the Royal Academy of Science out of the UK talking about, are we alone in the universe? And I wanted to know from a transhumanist point of view, did they think there was anything in Avatar, the movie, that smacked of realism as far as being able to upload our brains and create these bodies that could travel into far distances in space. But I've debated Hughes on his own show, his syndicated talk show, Change Surfer Radio. And Hughes is an unrepentant transhumanist Buddhist for sure. He's the author of Citizen Cyborg, Why Democratic Societies Must Respond to the Redesigned Human of the Future. Well, you know what? I could almost use the same title, Steve, and say why the church must respond to the redesigned human of the future, because, folks, this is coming whether people want it to or not, and it is so close now to being unveiled. I'm not talking about cosmologically close. I mean, it is very close now. It could happen literally at any moment, and I think it carries magnificent prophetic themes around it. We're literally talking about large-scale genetic neurological re-engineering of humanity. And if you go even to Wikipedia and look up transhumanists, it'll say this is the next chapter in evolution, the result of accelerating developments in the fields of genomics, stem cell research. They give you the whole list, and nanotechnology as the next step in human evolution. And for anybody that thinks that this is wishful thinking on the part of the transhumanists, just pick up your newspaper. Get your newest science magazine and start reading. Excuse me, Steve. There was a Reuters article. This was just in 2009, just recently, titled "Scientists Want Debate on Animals with Human Genes." And Steve, you remember about 24 months ago when they were having the embryology debates in the UK? Remember that?
Absolutely.
And there were scientists there, because they want public funding. And they don't want to just rely on private funding. They were coming to the government to try to get tax dollars out of the UK so they could do experiments, but their experiments were exotic. They wanted to experiment with splice-like technology, blending humans with animals. And so the government put it forward into a public debate. And if you recall, excuse me, even the Vatican had two bishops that showed up and said that if women participate in providing ovum and then later on decide they want to raise this splice baby as their own child, they ought to have the right to do so. These were the most extraordinary conversations. Well, anyway, excuse me, those scientists, they're back now. And now they want to know how far the public will allow them to continue going and using public funds. And this news piece, this is a Reuters news article, so we're not talking about weekly world news here. This is a legitimate news article. It starts out, and I'll read it to you. It starts out, a mouse that can speak, a monkey with Down's syndrome, dogs with human hands and feet. British scientists want to know if such experiments are acceptable, end quote. And if you go and just Google the article and read it for yourself, you'll find out that it goes on with revelations that scientists inside Britain are comfortable now with up to 50-50 animal-human integration, and more alarmingly, the article implies that not all of the research currently under design is being kept at the embryonic level, which is where most of the people in the public still think the splice technology is being kept at the embryonic level, but it's not. There are places now where it's fully mature monstrosities, and as I understand it, you actually went and saw the movie Splice, right?
Yes, I did. And what was interesting about that, good point to splice it into the conversation, the whole basis of it, Tom, is a woman who is one of the scientists. She has a love interest with the other scientists. They're doing secret experiments while being funded by this dark mega corporation that hangs out in the background, okay? And she takes her egg, inserts it into the synthetic life form. The life form grows into kind of like a female it with a tail. The female it is actually obviously gets involved sexually with a man. And what was interesting to me, there was nothing in the dialogue or even the inference that these things would spring and literally sprout, I guess a better word, wings, and turn into exact caricatures of what I would call is, even from middle-aged woodcuts, it looks like a fallen angel slash demonic hybrid, okay?
Wow.
And I, you know, somebody, by the way, somebody sent me an email today after explaining that on Coast to Coast the other night, saying I ruined the movie for him, and I read him back, I wrote him back an email saying, you don't get it, you missed the whole point. It's not that the movie is being ruined, it's that your life is ready to be ruined. I tell people, I've said this for 15 years, when Satan said, ye shall not die, this is what he promises the Illuminati, the New World Order, that they're never going to die, that they're basically going to be able to live in their perversion perpetually with attenuated senses, superheroes, the Ubermensch, the very pinnacle of a composite creation, and basically thumb their noses at God in eternal judgment. And I actually had, he's dead now, I actually had one of the intelligence agency's former top guys tell me about, and this guy was as cold as you know, I'll just say it, a mass murderer's heart, yet he was brought to tears when he talks about what he's already seen, the animal-human composites, the horrific underground bases, the horrific experimentation. So what I'm saying is all of the floater stories, they're all floaters, we're 50 to 100 years beyond that right now, because again, as you said, it was the Nephilim that interjected, or if you will, or what they placed themselves into the seed of man to corrupt it, to make obviously God's word a lie, and it wasn't, but they tried to do that, and now they're doing the same thing, only they're taking it, they're accelerating it basically this, perpetual life, perpetual downloads, and if people understood, even the pornography industry is putting the vast amounts of money into sex bots. You know, and you know, you carry those stories on your website. When I first started talking about that and wrote the book Genetic Armageddon, everybody said, that's too far out. No one wants to read about that. Well, I got news for you. That's like Little League compared to what you and I are talking about tonight. And I maintain that and have been told this by people in that world, that they can clone human beings now. They can give them the, the visual abilities of an eagle. They can give them almost like an ability for spontaneous generation of lost limbs, and even DARPA's, experimenting. They broke the story of suspended animation. That was such a minuscule revelation compared to what they can do. So we've got the period now that Jesus spoke about, that there would no flesh be left alive. You could say this: the descendants of Adam must disappear, so that the offspring of this technological hellions can come on the scene. And what's happening to Garrett and others is they're now coming into the spirit realm, where they have been, if you will, agnostics, atheists, but now they're being confronted by the very, and I would say the source of their revelation, they're coming face to face with.
Yeah, and the whole sexual aspect you mentioned in the Splice film, I haven't seen it. I want to see it. It's just not playing in my area yet. When it does play, I want to go see it, obviously, because the film depicts in Hollywood style what some of the real science, however, is actually unfolding to be today. And the sexual aspect of it, to me, was interesting purely from both a theological and philosophical point of view, because among what the Watchers did, there was obviously this sexual side of it, and sexual deviation, part of what the Watchers did, And also down through time with the incubus and succubus, there was an allure, if you will. There was something that was tempting about it, because that's partly what demons do. And in the film previews that I've seen for this film, they make it very seductive, almost, and it's demonic, because I haven't seen the movie, but they make this woman, even though she's very weird looking and her legs are all distorted and she's got a giant tail and her forehead is kind of half split. She's part animal, part human, but in the depictions that I've seen in the film previews, they make her kind of seductive as well. And I don't know if she winds up raping the guy, or if he just gets allured with her, or if I don't know what happens.
No, and I don't care about, the thing is, this is too important. Yes, she does. And then the offspring, you're going to love this one. The offspring then has relations with the woman, okay, who ends up carrying the third generation. But the offspring at the end, the male offspring, who seduces, in effect, his mother, okay, interesting, is the one that is the 10-foot giant with wings, okay?
A 10-foot giant?
Yes. Yes.
So now you definitely have a spirit of Nephilim that is operating,
absolutely,
at least in this film interpretation. We're talking about modern incubus and succubus and Nephilim. Well, most Americans see...
Hey, Tom? Yeah, you better explain what incubus and succubus is, because most people don't understand that.
Well, the male and female demons in lore that would come to people at night and copulate with them. So... Yeah, and there was also fables about the offspring of that copulation, and sometimes it includes, once again, giants. So there is a stream that is running deep in the psyche of mankind, and also within our history, that tells us something happened once before, but now we're there again. And you and I have talked about the amazing parallels between what the Watchers did. We'll talk about this maybe later in this hour or in the next hour, the amazing parallels between what we are doing now and what those ancient fallen beings did. But Steve, most Americans would be absolutely amazed to learn that in preparation for this post-human revolution, the United States government itself, through the National Institutes of Health, which is the largest part of our government that makes grants and money available using U.S. tax dollars, in April 2006, granted Case Law School in Cleveland, Ohio, $773,000 of American taxpayers' money, guess what, to begin developing. I'm not making this up, and anybody that wants to Google this and read the press release from Case Law School for themselves can, to begin developing the actual guidelines that will be used for setting the policy, government policy, for the next step in human evolution, genetic enhancement. Maxwell Melhelm is the professor of bioethics at Case Law School, or was then, of medicine. He led the team of law professors, physicians, bioethicists over the 2-year project that ended in 2009. And I'll quote from their press release, this small section, to, quote, develop standards for tests on human subjects in research that involves the use of genetic technologies to enhance normal individuals, end quote. Now, that is a direct quote from their own press release. Following that study in 2009, I can forward to people if they want it. Melhelm began offering 2 university lectures. In fact, you can go to Arizona State University and listen to these as downloads. One of them is called Directed Evolution, Public Policy and Human Enhancement. And the second is called Transhumanism and the Future of Democracy. Because keep in mind, Melhelm is the bioethicist from Case Law School who was given the nearly $1 million grant from the U.S. National Institute of Health to begin establishing what the policies, legal policies will be to extend the constitutional and Bill of Rights protections to human non-humans, enhanced humans. And immediately upon the conclusion of that study, they were supposed to publish, Steve, a report talking about how did they use human subjects, because that's what the money was given for. They actually used living human subjects for enhancement, genetic enhancement studies. They've had, to this day, I have not seen any published report, but what I have saw is Milhelm out there now on the circuit, going to the universities, giving these lectures, Directed Evolution, Public Policy and Human Enhancement, and Transhumanism in the Future of Democracy, where he is addressing the need. I've heard these lectures for society to comprehend how emerging fields of science are in approaching years going to alter what it means to be a human and what that means to democracy, individual rights, free will, eugenics, equality. I listened to part of one of his lectures today on this very same thing, part of his Transhumanism in the Future of Democracy, and he was saying that what scores of people are afraid of is directed germline genetic engineering, he says, where we are going to remove unwanted portions of DNA and add new segments of DNA to a sufficiently early form of human life so that the alterations that they create are going to be carried forward into preceding generations. Then he actually added cynically that, quote, for people who are worried about this, the worst case scenario is that the entire elimination of the human species could occur, end quote. And then he goes on to describe how that can happen in two ways. Number one, Steve, by the destruction of the species by genetic Armageddon. Sounds very much like a book you wrote. And secondly, the new species of transhuman or posthumans could become a superior hominid species that doesn't see the rest of us as valuable anymore and wipe out the normals. These are his words. And then he went on to proceed, astonishingly, to argue why directed evolution of the species to posthuman is necessary, forthcoming, and how the law is going to be written to favor enhanced humans. Well, I believe that he's right. Unless there is a divine intervention, and God could do that, but if there's not, people had better realize that our own government is using U.S. taxpayers' dollars right now to actually set the policy for government guidelines that are going to be involved in transhumanism. Other law schools, Stanford University, Oxford University, each of them now for the last few years are hosting at least one per year, some of them two per year, human enhancement and technology conferences where transhumanists, futurists, bioethicists, legal scholars, members of DARPA, the military, they're coming together and they're talking about what is the ethical, legal, and inevitable ramifications of post-humanity going to be. One of the university professors, and I do apologize, Steve, I've had this cold all week and it keeps making me want to cough, is, of course, the director of the Future of Humanity Institute, a professor of philosophy at Oxford University, Nick Bostrom. You're familiar with him, aren't you?
Yes.
And he is a leading advocate of transhumanism, but a very specific center of interest, because he, like the ancient watchers before him, watchers, the fallen angels that mingled human DNA with animals and their seed to produce Nephilim, he envisions remanufacturing humans with animals, plants, and other synthetic life forms through the use of modern sciences, including germline engineering, recombinant DNA technology, transgenics. But one of the horrific realities about this science is very splice-like, in that given that molecular biologists, they classify the functions of genes within their native species, but none of them know, in almost all cases, how the gene's coding is going to react from one species to another. And therefore, they actually expect, that's where this splice movie is growing out of, this speculation. They expect the genetic structure of these modified animal humans is going to be changed in physical appearance, sensory modalities, disease propensity, prion contamination possibly, personality, behavior traits, maybe even gigantism, and more, as a result of their modifications. And I took every one of those words out of their own documents, out of their own writings.
And you can sum it up. You can sum it up, Tom, by saying, "Hey, they're not only bringing back the forbidden technological processes that caused the anger of God to rise up and destroy the world that was, but also the thing is that they're in our face." You see, this is the thing that you and I have to do. We have to, by the grace of God, articulate to the pastors in the pulpits that do not understand the war that's against them, the necessity of being able to deal, to be able to teach their flocks. And I got news for you. It'd be a strange thing for them to teach their flocks instead of fleece their flocks, okay? And if they teach their flocks, they wouldn't have to fleece their flocks. That's just a little aside there. But the point is that this enhancement that's taking place, it is the destruction of the seed of Adam, if that were left to be. Because again, the thing is that it's like the Frankenstein story, Mary Shelley. The point is that there's so much behind it. And Sue Bradley has done an amazing job on her investigation of that. But even the electromagnetic attenuation of time and space and the hyperdimensional realms of a multiverse, multiple dimensions that we don't even know of. The thing that's amazing to me is that they're talking about using a strand of DNA, whether it's animal or human or a composite, to be able to store, if you will, the entire Library of Congress. So I think that what people have got to understand, and I want to share something. Nobody else has talked about this, but I will. The book of Ezekiel in the 16th chapter even talks about the Egyptians, that if you know the story, the women of Israel went after the Egyptians because they were great of flesh. Well, what do you see on television night and day? Male enhancement, okay? Enhancement. That's the word I'm going after, okay? I'm not trying to be tacky. I'm not trying to, quote, get into realms I shouldn't. But the point is that it is, if you will, it's the order of the day. And, you know, it's interesting because if you notice, obviously, when we get into the alien part, we'll go into the next hour with that, but isn't it amazing that of all the abductions, of all the sexual, if you will, processes and extractions, that basically somebody with the technology of the stars has to come to planet Earth for a good time, you know? I mean, the point being is that it's in our face, it's in our literature, it's in our science, and it's in your it's in your wallet, ladies and gentlemen, because you and we're paying for this stuff, and it doesn't even get into some of the things that we can go into in the next hour, because again, it all relates, it's all leading to the same thing. The end of man, the promise of the devil to his followers that ye shall live forever, that you'll be permanently and perpetually pleased and indulgent, and that when you're basically anything wears out, we just install a new one. Composite cyborgs with replaceable parts.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well, how much time do we have before we go to break?
I think we're just about there. I think we got about a minute. So is there anything you want to finish up in this? Because I want to get into UFOs in the next hour, if you would, because I think we've got to tie it together with, obviously, the advanced technology and the alien technology. And for the record, when I say aliens, I mean fallen angel technology that is being utilized by the governments. And, you know, it's interesting because when you and I talk about this stuff, the Pentagon's computers light up. I mean, it would be interesting to read out who's listening to us online right now after the show. But the issue is that these guys refer to all of the stuff we're talking about in the past as the gods of the Sumerians. Well, I think they should actually be more intellectually honest and say this, the devils of the past, because the devils of the past are now, if you will, the devils of the present. And I think that people have better get a grasp of this because, as Jesus said, the thief comes to rob, to kill, and destroy. And that's what this is all about.
Well, one thing, if I get a chance in the next hour, just before we go into that, if I can make the case that this is now being considered by the highest levels of the Pentagon and the U.S. military as the next arms race, I want to make that point and give people some information they can follow up on, and then we can go into why would it be the next arms race. There's been for some time suspicion that we are talking about the exchange of technology with some unknown intelligence.
Obviously, transhumanism is the
vehicle to lead us to genetic Armageddon, or the end of man if the days weren't shortened by the mercy and intervention of living God. Okay, Tom, let's make the point about the military and the next frontier. Why this is critical for everyone to understand, because we're not even, it's like they don't want to build a better mousetrap. They want to build a better war.
No, and, the former chairman of the President's Council on Bioethics, Leon Cass, who served under the Bush administration, he made that very point. He served on that. He was the chairman. He had access to information the rest of us don't, top secret information. He provided a status report when he stood down from his chairmanship on how real the frightening dangers of biotech in the hands of a transhumanist vision could be. And I'm not going to go into his book because we don't have time, but I would challenge people to go and read Life, Liberty, and the Defense of Dignity, the challenges of bioethics, where he's talking about human nature now is on the operating table. The public isn't even aware of it. It's being altered. Studies are in place now for eugenic and psychic enhancement, wholesale redesign, and he goes into descriptions about how in leading laboratories, this is not speculation, this is happening, academic and industrial leading laboratories, there are new splice-like creators who are not only amassing their powers, honing their skills, but out there on the streets, what he calls the evangelists, he's talking about the transhumanists, they're out there zealously prophesying this post-human future, and his warning is that for anybody that cares about preserving humanity, they had better start paying attention now, because he says we are talking about redefining what it means to be an animal, what it means to be a human, what it means to be a superhuman, and then he makes this astonishing statement, what it means to become a god. Well, now this sounds very much like something out of mythology, doesn't it? Which was a carryover from what the Watchers were doing. But his warning of the hazards of emerging technologies, it's not an overreaction. And there are multiple illustrations. You mentioned before we went to the break how many of the pastors out there, if they were aware so that they could teach some of their classes, we don't even have time to talk about how that crime scene schools, crime scene analysis schools like the Birkbeck Law School out of the UK are now talking about how they're going to have to add classes devoted to analyzing crime scenes committed by post-humans. And I read their own press release where they were talking about this, where they're going to need specifically trained law enforcement personnel who will be able to analyze a crime scene that was conducted by something that's only part human. I mean, have you ever thought, Steve, that we would read such things in mainstream press? You add to that things like memory transference. There's this whole new field of study now suggesting that complex behavior patterns, memories, can be transferred from the donors of large organs to their recipients. Well, extrapolate that to merging ourselves with animals and imagine what it's going to mean when you have the memories or the complex behavior patterns of a wolf that is combined with a human. No wonder they're going to have specially trained people that can analyze a crime scene that may have been perpetrated by a serial rapist who is part wolf and part human, because nothing that we know about profiling, nothing that we know about forensics is going to apply to that. But take those kind of issues, some of which we've talked about before, some of which we haven't. But now take them to the next stage, past one-on-one personal malevolence by human animals. Now our own government is actually studying, funding, talking about, and preparing for what they're calling swarm violence by human non-humans. Give you an illustration that people can go to Google and look up. There was a House Foreign Affairs, HFA, House Foreign Affairs Committee meeting chaired by California Democrat Brad Sherman just a few months ago. Brad is best known for his expertise on the spread of nuclear weapons and terrorism. And he was picked for this, to chair this meeting, because they're talking about transhuman terrorists in the future. His was just one of a number of government panels right now that are studying the implications of genetic modification, human transforming technologies related to future terrorism. Well, anyway, Congressional Quarterly columnist Mark Stenzel attended and listened to the HFA committee hearings in California, and he wrote in his March 15, 2009 article, Futurists, Genes Without Borders, that the conference, quote, sounded more like a Hollywood pitch from a sci-fi thriller than a sober discussion of scientific reality, with its talk of biotech's potential for creating super soldiers, super intelligence, and super animals that could become agents of unprecedented lethal force, end quote.
Wow.
There was something even more profound. And this is a peer-reviewed study. George Annis, Laurie Andrews, Rosario Asasi wrote an apocalyptic-sounding, peer-reviewed article for the American Journal of Law and Medicine. The name of the article was Protecting the Endangered Human Toward an International Treaty Prohibiting Cloning and Inheritable Alterations to Humans. I'll just give you one small quote from the article. The new species or post-human will likely view the old normal humans as inferior, even savages, and fit for slavery or slaughter. The normals, on the other hand, will see the post-humans as a threat, and if they can, may engage in a preemptive strike by killing the post-humans before they themselves are killed or enslaved by them. It is ultimately this predictable potential for genocide that makes species-altering experiments potential weapons of mass destruction and makes the unaccountable genetic engineer a potential bioterrorist, end quote. Steve, that was a peer-reviewed article from the American Journal of Law and Medicine. Well, the problem is observations like those by Annis, Andrews, and Asasi, they, on the one hand, while they support Professor Hugo de Garis's nightmarish vision of a future where you got Artilex and posthumans joining together against us normals in this incomprehensible war leading to gigadeath. Gigadeath is another term that Hugo uses a lot. Notwithstanding those warnings, the fact is it could be unavoidable. Those who are giving testimony to the Pentagon and to the government right now are, for instance, Professor Gregory Stock. His book, Redesigning Humans, Our Inevitable Genetic Future. He says that stopping what we've started, that's a mirage. We simply cannot find the brakes. Werner Verge said the same thing. He said, even if all the governments of the world were to understand the threat and be in deadly fear of it, progress toward the goal would continue because competitive advantages, economic, militarily, and that in societies where they have tried to pass laws or have customs that forbid the advancement of technology, all they do is merely assure that somebody else is going to get ahead of them. So academic scientists now, technical consultants to the Pentagon, believe that these principles, as extrapolated by Werner Wendt and others, that they are correct, and as a result, the United States now, Steve, this based on their own actual discourses, believe that we could be forced into large-scale species-altering output, including human enhancement for military purposes, because the enemies of America are seeking to develop the same, and they will attempt to use it to subjugate the United States if they can, which is now quickly emerging, excuse me, as a troubling scenario within government think tanks and intelligence agencies inside Washington, including the Jasons, the celebrated scientists on the Pentagon's most prestigious scientific advisory panel, now perceive, and they're not really hiding it, Mankind 2.0 as the next arms race. I'm not kidding. Just as the old Soviet Union and the United States with their respective allies competed for supremacy in nuclear arms following the Second World War, the arms race, the Jasons are worried about adversaries' ability to exploit advances in human modification and therefore create a threat to national security. There was a report on this for anybody that wants to follow up at Wired magazine recently titled Top Pentagon Scientists Fear Brain-Modified Foes, It was a special report that was based on a leaked military report in which the Jasons were caught admitting concern over neuropharmaceutical performance enhancement, brain-computer interfaces technology, being developed by other countries ahead of the United States. And the Jasons are now recommending that the American military push ahead with its own performance enhancement, human alteration research, and also to monitor foreign studies to make sure that the enemies of the United States don't suddenly become more enhanced, smarter, faster, stronger, more Nephilim-like, that's my term, better able to endure the harsh realities of war than American troops. They are concerned